Joining me now is Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland. Congresswoman, I really appreciate you taking the time this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
In the wake of the school shooting last week in Nashville that killed 3 children and 3 adults, you, along with your colleagues, Representatives Elissa Slotkin, Mark Takano, and Senator Ed Markey, reintroduced the Gun Violence Prevention Research Act. Can you tell us about the legislation?
Well, thank you for the question and thanks for having me on. What this legislation does is it makes a declaration that gun violence is a public health emergency, and it directs the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, to really put some time into researching the root causes of gun violence. And when we talk about gun violence, we typically think of it from a sociological standpoint, but this is going to use sociology, psychology, data, and science, and really dig into what motivates people to commit gun violence, who is committing it, and just coming up with things that we can do to try and prevent it.
You've said before, and you just said now, that this will really look into the root causes of gun violence. Can you pull back the curtain a little bit and give us some insight? How specifically would the legislation do that?
Well, I think the legislation will be very, very specific because, well, first of all, we have not declared this a national public health crisis, so it needs adequate resources. And so this will direct the CDC to spend $50 million per year over a 5-year period to really do some in-depth research and just trying to find out, what motivates people, what are some of the demographic profiles of who commits gun violence, what motivates them, why are they doing it, and really, getting deep into the root causes of it. Now, is this legislation alone going to eliminate all gun violence? Absolutely not. But what we often have are these very tragic, high-profile events. And when you hear people talking about school children not being safe in the one place they should be safe, it's just well past time to take action.
You said it's not enough to prevent gun violence, and according to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been 139 mass shootings this year to date. And Congresswoman, we are not live right now, so by the time this video does get published, that number could very well increase. This is a problem that affects every community. So what else needs to be done aside from this legislation to put an end to this mass shooting cycle?
Well, when we think about mass shootings, we often look at the types of weapons that are used and how they are acquired. And so we know that, we are trying to pass things in the House right now to address the access to semi-automatic weapons or weapons of war that are meant to kill large numbers of people very quickly. Those things should not be on the streets. Civilians should not own those. So that's one thing to look at. And then also, too, just looking at, sadly, when we look at who commits these mass shootings, they tend to be male and they tend to be younger. And so what is going on with these young men in America where they think that this is how you solve a problem or how you resolve being embarrassed or being rejected? And so I think there's just a lot of psychology, a lot of data, and even science to try to determine, what's going on with these people. But, there are 2 parts to this: the people who commit the gun violence and the fact that there are more guns than there are people in the United States. And in addition to people who legally buy guns and do exactly what we ask them to do, we know that there is an underground gun market where people are either stealing guns or they're getting them illegally. So it's really taking a completely comprehensive approach to see what we can do to reduce gun violence in the United States.
You broke it down into 2 parts: the people themselves who commit the gun violence as well as the guns themselves. So let's talk about the people first. Republicans and Democrats alike have said that there is a mental health crisis in this country, especially when it pertains to gun violence. Senator Markey, yourself, as well as Representatives Slotkin and Takano are all Democrats. What has the Republican response been to your legislation?
The Republican response to having any discussion about common sense gun violence has been pretty disappointing. Now, we did pass a suite of bills in the last Congress around safety, trying to really look at public safety and dealing with mental health and trying to do some things to help people. But what Republicans seem to be afraid to do is really take those big steps. And here's what's so interesting. Addressing gun violence in a comprehensive way is wildly popular with the public across all party lines. And so as you see the effectiveness of the NRA start to dilute, as more and more children die in gun violence, places of worship, going to concerts, going to the grocery store, all those things that we routinely do in daily life in the United States have now put us on alert. And so we have to really think about, are we serious about taking action? Are we going to do the research and come up with policies that keep everyone safe? This is a conversation about safety, and sometimes it turns into guns and the Second Amendment. This is about communities that are safe, and that is something that everyone should want and everyone deserves in this country.